a goodwill beginner. All my good works are needles in hay, and I try to do right based on my own sight, just like a blind man who's standing in the way. And all that I've taken, it was sadly mistaken to bleed for my own, for my sake. Now everything I have was stolen or borrowed. All that I've taken is much more than I can take. I was a fool in the quickness of the sand, and I was a leper trying to save my own skin. But now I'm a man who knows where I stand on the rock of ages. That's where I stand. Lord, you bore my refuse. You are my refuge. You gave up everything when you threw it all away. You gave me life new. You carried my weight through the evening to the morning and to the day. I was a fool in the midst of the sand. I was a leper trying to save my own skin. But now I'm a man who knows where I stand on the rock of ages. Jesus, that's where I stand. On the rock of ages, Jesus, that's where I stand.
Welcome to Calvary Chapel Greenville, Texas. We're excited that you're here. Even if you have 2 pens in your hand, we're excited to get going, ready to happen, all that stuff. Couldn't be better. All right, things that are coming up. Ladies, you may have noticed this yesterday. If you didn't, next Tuesday at 6 p.m., still continuing on through the book of Psalms in the blue room. So you got that going for you. Next thing we have on the list is the book of Daniel. We're going through that tonight. 3 weeks in chapter 2, and it's like we're not going section by section. We're just kind of going back through and picking up the parts that we missed the last time. So you'll enjoy that. This is week 3 of chapter 2, and this will be our last night of chapter 2. I think it'll be a good one. Hopefully we do that. All right, next Wednesday, it says Don will be here, but I know better. So if those of you who are praying for Don, continue to pray for Don. He's got to go back in for some more surgery, because why not? Let's get some more surgery going on. And he's not doing well. So I'll cover this first Wednesday coming up. You guys will be excited. I already have my message. It's the one I use for men's breakfast. So those of you who are at men's breakfast, you'll have to hear it twice, but that's okay. Was that a guilty hand up? Was that what you said? I thought I saw guilt on your face. All right. We'll also be doing the communion. And just so you guys know, that's February 7th. But what's more important there is I have new communion things, you know. The old ones were kind of sketchy and weird, so we got new ones. Hopefully they're good. The brand that we used to use is not being sold at Mardell anymore. I don't know why, but probably we can get them on Amazon or something like that. We can get them straight from China. Do what? We'll get proper juice this time. No more grape drink. That's my pledge to you. All right. Yes. Men's prayer Friday mornings at 6 a.m. Notice I just completely disregarded what you said. Men's prayer Friday mornings at 6 a.m. Tony, what time is that? 6 a.m. Niles, what time is that? 0600. Gotcha. So that's the time. Now, I will say this. Last week, I was really off. Those of you who weren't here Sunday heard this humorous thing that happened to me. I woke up Friday morning, I'm like, everything's on time, I'm moving really well. I get in my car and I'm heading up here and I'm like, man, it's a little bit lighter than normal. Man, there's more cars on the road than normal. And I was almost here before I realized I'm an entire hour late. I was sitting there thinking, man, I'm doing really well. No, my whole schedule slipped by an hour. I don't know what happened. Anyway, so 6 a.m. That's what time I got home this morning, as a matter of fact. So happy times. Hey, men's breakfast, that 4th Saturday coming up, February 24th. And we may still be doing it at the place we went last time, which is Baker's Ribs. We may not. We'll have to come to see, like, you missed out, didn't you? I know you missed out because I got biscuits and gravy. Just saying. Biscuits and gravy is proper food. Right, Ian? It can be. Depends on the gravy. You know, you try to raise these kids, right? And they betray you. Who over here likes biscuits and gravy? Over here. See, there was not sausage in there. That's a good call. We need to talk to him about that. Anyways, hey, this coming Sunday is Fellowship Meal. And that theme is Italian food. Now, I can say that tonight because, I don't want to get in trouble. Italian food. And I know people are kind of working up like what they're going to do with noodles and so on like that. What have you guys figured out? I have a new mustache thing I'm using and it's not working. Anyways, hey, and Sunday mornings. Monday mornings don't come here, but Sunday mornings we're in the Gospel of Mark. So you'll be happy to see that. We've got, I think, another couple of weeks left in Mark, and that's it. So I don't know what's happening now. My mustache is trying to grow back into my mouth all of a sudden. I don't know what's happening to me. I need help. I mean, desperately, I need help. What? Cut it off. No, see. This is where we don't listen to bad advice. What? I thought about trimming it, but, it's like, anyways, I just don't think so. Tonight, we're in Daniel chapter 2. Are you surprised? No, you're not. Why? Because this is our 3rd week in Daniel chapter 2. Tonight, we're going to look specifically at the statue. The first night, we did more of the inductive study, going through all the different nuance and the small detail. Second time, which was last Wednesday, we looked at the sovereignty of God, the strength of God. Basically, God is in control. He's amazing. He's everything. and in the light of Daniel, because as we go through the book of Daniel, we find that it's God who's in charge. It's God who has this thing under control. And so we yield to God. Daniel yielded to God. His friends also yielded to God. And so it's just the way it works, right? Wait, Tony, how do you say that? It bees that way. It bees that way. So his buddies, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they're also in that same mindset. In other words, they're dependent upon God. Now, tonight we're going to look a little bit again at the dependency on God, but for a very specific reason. Inside of this passage, we're going to look specifically at the statue, what was in King Nebuchadnezzar's dream, what Daniel gave the interpretation of, and so on like that. Now, I will say this, and you guys can tell me your thoughts on this. I'll be willing to listen. There is one part of the statue that we're not 100% sure what it means. We can't give you the nuance and detail of it, but we all have our speculation, and people in times past have had their speculation, so it's going to be an entertaining time. As we go through here and we see things about the statue, I want you to understand and know a few things that I think make this maybe just jump off the page a little more. Maybe it gives it a deeper meaning or an anchor point. So when you look at it, you're not just thinking, oh, it's a statue of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and then iron and clay. So you don't just look at it from kind of a surface level, but you look at it maybe a little bit deeper, maybe with a little bit more scrutiny. And as people bring their thinking and their thoughts to you, you look at it and you say, well, this guy is obviously wrong, right? So we always want to know when people are wrong, and we point at them and we make fun of them. Different class. But we want to be as accurate as possible when we're going through the Bible. For that reason, we're going to start this. But you know what? We're going to, I said that when we were praying before service and all that. But let's do it one more time, just that way the TV folks. We always try to pander to the TV folks. Let's get them squared away. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you this evening. We ask for the leading of your Holy Spirit. Show us this information. Teach us your ways, your word. Lord, we ask for your strength to make it through here. And Lord, just open our eyes and open our hearts to what you have for us to know. Lord, we do thank you. We love and praise you and ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, if you'll recall, King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. He was messed up about it. He was freaking out. What's this mean? What's going on? And he wasn't happy at all. So he calls for all these people to figure out what his dream is. And you'll recall that they were just like, well, we can't figure it out. Basically what it came down to. We just don't know what we're doing. And so I'm going to start off with verse 26. We're going to just look at that real quick, and then this is kind of the setup. So now in verse 26, you see this. The king declared to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, "Are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation?" So Daniel's been brought in after the fact. He's in there, and it's like, okay, you think you got this? All right, you tell me what you got. What he didn't know, and what he will soon understand, is that Daniel had that information. The only reason Daniel had that information was because he sought God for the information. With that said, let me ask you a question. Who gave King Nebuchadnezzar his dream? Well, that would be God. Who can interpret that dream? Oh yeah, that would be God, because he understands the reason why he did what he did. And the way that it is brought to knowledge is through a prophet. This time it's the prophet Daniel. And so he will prophesy, he will explain what's going on. So as the king asks the question, can you do this? Daniel corrects him in kindness and love. And I think it's important to see that and understand that, because you'll see that he gives the credit not to Daniel, but to God. I know it's kind of a repeat something of last week, but it's really not, because we're building the case for what we're talking about tonight. Look with me in verse 27. It says, Daniel answered the king and said, "No wise men, enchanters, magicians, or astrologers can show the king the mystery that the king has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mystery, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head as you lay in bed are these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed, came thoughts of what would be after this. And he who reveals mysteries made known to you what is to be. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because of any wisdom that I have more than all the living, but in order that the interpretation may be made known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your mind. And so we're reminded now that the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had was specifically from God. Now, what we always want to remember is, if you want to know the intent of what's being said, you go to the person who's saying it. If you want to practice good hermeneutics, there's our big $1 million word for the day. Hermeneutics is what? It's basically, in a nutshell, understanding the Bible or understanding the text that you're reading in context. What was the time like at that time? What was the geography there? All these different things play into helping to understand what was specifically happening, why, and all that. So if you're going to ask somebody, well, what do you mean by this information? And they begin to expound to you what it was that information really backed up to. Well, the reason I came to that was, if you go back in my life 40 years and then you start talking about all these things, well, that's kind of what we have here. God can show you something, and I'll make this very evident to you. God has probably shown you something, and it just passed you clean by. It's like, I see it in there, but I don't understand what I'm reading. I just don't get it. The Ethiopian eunuch was like that as he's trying to go through Isaiah, and then, of course, he was helped out in that set. When we want to know what's being said, when we want to know what's going on, it's better to go to the source. And let's put it in the regular context. If you were to hear something about somebody, right? I had the opportunity to hear, this guy calls me up and he says, I have a concern, I have questions, they're biblical questions. I'm like, perfect, I can help you on this one. And so he starts talking about it, and it's church issues. His church is having issues, and he's asking me, like, what do I do? Or not really so much what do I do, but are we doing the right thing? More in that context. And it's like, well, yeah, he did something so unique, and I was so impressed by this. He didn't give opinion. He didn't give conjecture. He didn't give any of this stuff. He just said, this is what's happened. This is what has been said. Are we, do you think this is being handled well? It's, well, I guess as well as you're going to handle it. I mean, not in exactly that setup, but he wasn't about giving me opinion. He wasn't about the gossip. He was just like, this is what it is. And so to put this in context, well, I mean, I know the pastor involved. I know some of the people in the church, not many of them, but I know enough of them to kind of get an idea of what's going on. But inside of that thing, we were talking about the situation at a very basic level without gossip. Isn't that cool? And that's so rare these days. It's, well, what happened here? Let me tell you about my thinking. You know what I bet it was? You know what I think is going on? And of course we're Christians. We don't gossip, right? What do? We share. That's right. We gossip one person at a time. We call it sharing. Anyways, so when you want to find out that information, you go to the source, you find out what's going on. And for King Nebuchadnezzar, he needed to hear from God. But he doesn't have a direct conduit to God. He doesn't understand the scripture. He doesn't understand the Torah. He's really not there. So he needs to talk to someone who can give him that information. You may find, and I've found these people, they will tell you, I've read the Bible, and I can tell you it says this, that, and the other. Well, and that may be true. From a surface level, okay, I've read through, and we're just going to randomly pick. Don't you like when we do that? That's a really bad one to go to. Anyways, we won't randomly pick that anymore. Okay, I'm just going to pick up and read some random spot of the Bible. This is Zephaniah 3:8. Therefore, wait for me, declares the Lord, for the day when I rise up, seize the prey. I mean, let's put that in context, right? Why do we want to do that? Because I'm just going to seize the day. Okay, well, let's get to seize it. And that was completely from the hip. I just saw that. We're going to get Seize the Day t-shirts. So we're going to be like, hey, this is a big thing today. No. No. Slow it down. Go to what God says and figure out what God's saying in that place. And so this is what we're doing. This is what Nebuchadnezzar is doing. Daniel lays it out completely for him. This isn't from me. This isn't from the wise guys that you were asking, hey, come and tell us about this. This is from God. So you want to hear this interpretation? You want to know what this is? And so to this point, he really hasn't told him the dream. But we're going to look at this dream, and man, it's a weird one. This is one that would wake you up, but this doesn't make any sense. I don't have any cool pictures to put up. I'm just going to throw that out right now because we could show you a cool statue, but I didn't do that. So just imagine, if you will. Use your holy imagination. Going to verse 31, he says this. You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold altogether were broken in pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. Now, what's really cool about this is the fact that Daniel heard from God, and Daniel was bold enough to say, this is what God has shown me. This is the information what's here. I'm going to tell you this. And let me say this. This is such an accurate, such a concise way, and the only reason I can say that is because Nebuchadnezzar was like, yeah, that's right. I mean, he saw what it was. And yeah. Now, did he already remember his dream? I'm sure he did. Did it get brought back to him at this time? I don't know. I mean, it doesn't really read that way. So what we would say is that King Nebuchadnezzar is like now connected to what Daniel is saying. And this does a couple of things. It gives Daniel the credibility to use his authority, or rather the authority of God, to explain something that's going on. See, the credibility was the fact that what God says is happening. Say, well, what if something came out wrong? And that's where it gets interesting. If that happens, we throw it away. You think about people who went out and predicted the future. What was that one guy, Nostradamus or whatever like that? He got some stuff right, no doubt. He got some stuff wrong. Oh, interesting. What do you do with his prophecies now? Throw them in the trash. What about that guy that said Jesus is coming back on this day and it didn't happen twice? Harold Camping, thank you so much. What do you do with his information? Throw it in the trash. When somebody is telling you the prophecy of God and saying the things that's in there, you test it. You see what's there, and you prove it. Now, I make that point for here because this is an incredibly important part. This dream is huge. This is absolutely important. And to give you an idea and an example of what we're discussing now, I like to check it for what it's worth. I want to tell you that it was accurate. We'll show that again here in a second. And I'm going to just rattle off a bunch of information here in just a minute. You just hold on tight. That's what we're going to do. How many prophecies were there in the Old Testament about the coming of Jesus and all the detail and nuance of his life? The answer is over 300. What happened was all of the over 300 prophecies turned out right. That gets complicated, though. In order to be correct and right, or in order to be believable, you have to be correct and right every time. You can't miss. It has to be dead on perfect. Now, what's the problem with having over 300 prophecies? It's so easy to get one of those pieces wrong. The complexity builds. Now, I was in one of the, I was listening to a teaching of all things. I know you never do that stuff. I don't know. Who knows? That's weird. But listening to this teaching, this guy used this phrase, and I thought, I'm going to use that because it sounds really cool and important. He called it compound probability. In order to get one thing right, you make a prophecy of, I'm going to prophesy right now the sun's going to come up tomorrow. Hey, you know what? I'm going to be found to be right. But when I give you a second one, it says, and there's going to be a squirrel dancing on your hood of your car. While it's parked, of course. Well, now you go out there and you say, well, the sun came up. There's a squirrel. I think we're onto something now, right? What if I were to come to you and say, not only will you wake up, the sun will be out right there at this time, there'll be a squirrel in the front of your car, but you're also going to be hungry for soup. And then we start throwing all these weird details to your day, and everything comes accurately, dead on, perfect. That would be the compound probability. And when you take it to the 300 pieces of it, what we see with Jesus, then it's like, well, that has to be accurate. So before we go to the interpretation, before we see that, I want to illustrate how this works out. And you think about it in the context of, we've already know the first four kingdoms. That's easy. That's part of knowing what it is. We already know the first four things. The fifth one is what seems to be the mystery. But let's look at the life of Jesus for just a minute in this context. What do we see as far as prophecy, and where do we find it? So I'm just going to rattle these off. If you want, I can send you the list later because it's going to be hard to keep up with me. Born of a virgin, Isaiah 7:14. Born in Bethlehem, Micah 5:2. Born into the tribe of Judah, Genesis 49:10. Ministry began in Galilee, Isaiah 9:1. Miracles performed, Isaiah 35:5-6. Enters Jerusalem on a donkey, Zechariah 9:9. Betrayed by a friend, Psalm 41:9. Sold for 30 pieces of silver, Zechariah 11:12. Wounded, bruised, Isaiah 53:5. Hands and feet pierced, Psalm 22:16. Crucified with thieves, Isaiah 53:12. Garments torn and lots cast for them, Psalm 22:18. Bones would not be broken, Psalm 34:20. Side pierced, Zechariah 12:10. Buried in rich man's grave, Isaiah 53:9. Raised from the grave, Psalm 16:10. These, if you go through, the uniqueness of this is that there's so many different places and pieces and parts that they all come together. And they're not wrong or out of whack. So you said that's pretty brilliant. Well, let's go back and think about the prophecy or the dream that he saw. It was the head of fine gold. There was the chest and arms of silver, the middle and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, feet of partly iron, partly clay. So it's like, well, okay, we got to start understanding what's happening inside of that. Something that I want you to hold on to for just a minute as we go on. And I want you actually just, if this would be one of those things you might want to write down, it's to be interesting to just kind of keep that memory going. Gold is a precious metal, is it not? Some of you may have jewelry with gold on it. You look at it, see, there's gold right there, right on your hand. Let me ask the men this question. Men, you're going to understand this question. Ladies, you will not understand what I'm about to ask. I hate to tell you that. Would you ever make a knife out of gold? Why not? It's not strong enough. But it's a precious metal, Todd. Don't you know anything? Not practical. What's wrong with you people? See, the more precious the metal, we find out that it's softer and not functional, right? Silver, it's a little less valuable, but it's stronger. Bronze, less valuable, yet it's stronger. Iron, if you go around some buildings today, you'll find they're made of iron. Big bridges, there's this big one over in San Francisco. You may have never heard of it. It's the Golden Gate Bridge. Look it up, it's interesting. What is it made of? It's made of steel, it's made of iron, right? Why do they use that instead of gold? Because it's stronger. And so what's interesting about this is you see that the value of the precious metal, as it diminishes, the strength increases. Almost like it's a weird scale or something. Now, I want you to think about that one because there's some serious implications to that. If the head of gold may not be as strong, but guess what? It's worth a lot. It's valuable. The chest of silver, arms of silver and all that, not as valuable, but a little bit stronger. But once we make it down to the legs, once we're in the 2 pieces of iron, now we're at strength. And that's going to make sense. There's no value in it, but there's strength. Now, let's begin the interpretation, and we will work through this, and you'll be like, man, this is so cool. Maybe, hopefully. Verse 36 says, "This was the dream. Now we will tell its interpretation. You, O king, the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power and the might and the glory, and into whose hand he has given wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold." I want you to think about what we just read, because we passed 5 things and you didn't pay attention to them. How do I know? Because you're just like me and know this. You, O king, the King of kings, to whom God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power and the might and the glory. We're talking about 5 Gentile kingdoms. The first of it being Babylon. And that kingdom of Babylon was given to Nebuchadnezzar by who? By God. He said, wait a second, whoa. That's a Gentile kingdom. He doesn't do that kind of stuff. Here it says that he did. Now, if you see and kind of understand that the Israelites have been taken out of their land, they're not there anymore. They're never going to be properly back in the land like they were at the time of King David. They're not going to be back in the land properly like they were at the time of King Solomon. That's not going to happen until the new king comes. That's Jesus. I'm going to let you guys know that now already, right? So that's when we're going to see that time come. But in the meantime, we're going to see these Gentile kingdoms, the first of which being King Nebuchadnezzar. He's that head of gold. And it's wild that you think about it. It's like God gave him that kingdom, and the answer is yes. And you think, but King Nebuchadnezzar, man, that guy's a mess. We're going to see how much of a mess he is in chapter 3. I mean, no, I don't think so. But listen, God gave him that kingdom for a reason. See, he had to go take the Israelites out of Israel. He had to do God's work. And then, of course, he's going to follow God. He's going to become a believer in God. And so it's like, well, that makes sense now that why God would have given that to him. But you'd be kind of wrong, because we'll never balance out everything. As you look at the different kingdoms, not all of them you would say would be God-serving kind of kingdoms. So it's like, well, that kind of throws that on its ear. So for some reason that I cannot explain to you, God has put certain kings, certain leaders in place. And as much as you hate to admit that, and I know we're coming up on an election year now, and we're going to vote for the people we're going to vote for, and we're going to hope those people make it into office. But guess what? God's in control of who makes it into office. And you think, well, wait a second. But we saw the votes doing this, and this guy did that, and there was manipulation, and there was this, that. Hey, look, it wouldn't have happened unless God let it happen. And you can say, well, that's judgment, and you could be right. But God's the one who puts them in control. I think that's kind of fascinating. Now we know Satan's the god of the world, and he's causing all sorts of problems, and as long as God will allow him to do something, he does it. But as of right now, we just don't know. But it's God who gave him the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory. And then what's interesting, not only did God give him those things, but he also gave him the responsibilities. Into whose hand he has given wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, the birds of the heaven, making you ruler over them all. Interesting. Nebuchadnezzar gets the power, the glory, all that, but he also gets responsibility. And nobody likes responsibility, right? Man, how messed up is that? So let's look now at the other kingdoms. Another kingdom in verse 39 now. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. Okay. So there's two kingdoms. It kind of passes over them. But for what Nebuchadnezzar needs to hear, what he's trying to understand and what he was looking at, God, what's going to happen? Can you show me this? God's like, absolutely. I'm going to show you these Gentile kingdoms. This is how it's going to lay out. Until when? Till Jesus comes. He hasn't come in the way that you think yet, though. So you have the inferior shall rise after you. That's the silver. And then you have, after that, the bronze. And it shall rule over the earth. Like, wait a second. The kingdoms become less valuable, but they become more strong. But they're not having the same impact. But, well, right, but you see that their influence is different. Now, let me point out something before we get too far, because we're going to bring this back up in a minute. How much is Nebuchadnezzar king over? Pretty much the known world, right? What about the next kingdoms that come up? It's the same basic concept, same basic idea. Because you saw that with the silver and with the bronze. They rule over all the earth. Now down to verse 40. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. So something specific about this fourth kingdom, the one of iron. Now, here's what we know. And be careful not to trade what we do know for what we don't know, right? But here's what we do know. That first kingdom, the head of gold is Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar. That happened between 605 and 539 BC. It wasn't as strong and resilient a metal, and it didn't last all that long. Interesting, isn't it? The next would be the silver. That'd be the Medo-Persian. That was from 539 to 331. A little bit longer, so there's a little bit of stamina to this one. We're going to reduce it again now when we get to Greece, though. So Greece would be the bronze. That'd be the Grecian Empire. And again, at the time they had all the authority, all the stuff that was going on, they had that. And then the fourth kingdom we know to be Rome. You say, wait, Italy? But we're having Italian food. No. Difference. Rome. And that was a time when Jesus walked the earth. Who was in control? Who was in charge? That was a Gentile kingdom called Rome. Caesar who? Whatever. I mean, it's like, so you think, well, these people were in charge at that time. Now, it shows the timeline that I picked up anyway, shows Babylon from 605 to 539 BC, Medo-Persia is 539 to 331 BC, Greece was 331 BC to 168 BC, and then Rome was 168 BC to 476 AD, according to that. Now, there's a problem. Either we're currently without a kingdom that rules over the entirety of the earth, or Rome never lost it all the way. And so I think, so this is where we start to enter speculation. Hop on my little train with me. Let's have some fun. When did Rome lose everything? From an American perspective, it's been a while back. But if you go overseas and you go to a country that is primarily Catholic, how's Rome doing there? Pretty strong. Are they as strong as they need to be? No. But they're relatively strong. Now the question becomes, what about this fifth kingdom, the feet of iron and clay? Well, I think it's a safe bet. I think it's a safe bet to say this, that the iron is probably Rome mixed with whatever else. See, the clay would be the whatever else, and the iron would be that, because it only makes sense as you're following the elements coming down the statue. Like, well, that's partly there too, so I guess Rome is that. Now, here's what's kind of hard to run with this. We have sat down and figured out and been smart and said, the 10-part nation, partly iron and partly clay, is this. Have you ever heard any Bible teacher tell you what those 10 things are? I have. I've heard plenty of them. And the problem is they don't know. And so to teach that as ironclad, this is what it's got to be, man, it doesn't work out. I remember for the longest time, people kept saying, it's the European Union. Because initially the European Union had this and had that. And I'm like, okay, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, if you're looking on a piece of paper and you write these things down, you're like, this actually kind of can work. And I think that would probably work out. But then something interesting happened. The EU was not very strong. And then they started bringing other countries in. And then they started falling apart. Well, it's like, well, it could be the EU. Who's leading the EU? Is it Rome? I mean, indirectly, that's what some people would tell you. So maybe that's it. The problem is, I just don't see that being the answer. And the reason that I say that is it's not proper bedfellows to make it like the Gentile kingdom that's really going to turn. Because there's something unique about this kingdom, okay? It's directly against Israel. Now, is Europe directly against Israel? Not exactly. See, this is where it gets kind of convoluted. I've heard, and people started talking recently, like, well, maybe that's the BRICS thing, the BRICS nations. Was it Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa? Is that right? I'm trying to remember the BRICS nations. And maybe that's going to add up and be more. Okay, you know what? That's just as plausible as is the EU. But how does it hold up under the stress and the weight of criticism? And the answer is, I really don't know. I can't promise you that it's not the EU. I can't promise you that it's not BRICS. I can't promise anything. I did see something interesting, and when we get later on to the Four Horsemen and we see the other parts of Daniel coming out, I think we're going to be able to open it wider and say, what about these nations? How many are there? I'll save that tease for another time. But did you know that there are nations? You're going to be shocked when I tell you this. Are you prepared? Are you sitting down? You are sitting down good. There are nations that wholesale don't like Israel. Did you know that? Shocker, right? I know, it's just like, I'm in disbelief now. That is not the look of surprise. That is the look of I'm trying to act surprised. You got to act surprised. But you got to be surprised. No, I think it went to the restroom wrong. So, as we look at these, we say, wait a second. So, what if it's not EU? What if it's not BRICS? What if it's not, I don't know, let's talk about Gog and Magog and all that stuff. If that's part of it, you understand the Gog and Magog thing. We're talking Iran, Russia, and so on like that, right? So, maybe it's that's the conglomerate. But here's the catch to it. And this is where we got to be very careful about this. This kingdom is about to go down. We may not even see that this kingdom is there yet. So it's like when it's all said and done, it'll make perfect sense and we'll know exactly who it was. But will we know that ahead of the time of the situation? And the answer is we could. I mean, we're good Bible students, right? We're trying to learn, trying to grow, trying to be this thing. And we might find that, you know what? That's actually this 10-part kingdom. And we'll be like, we'll know something. The problem is, every time we look and we try to say, well, I think it's this one, I think it's that one, we keep getting it wrong. At some point, we'll get it right. At some point, it'll be like, oh, that was so obvious. How did we not see that one, man? That's so obvious. But what happens, and this is where we need to be careful with this, yet another location, I suppose, that we need to be careful. What is the benchmark of that last kingdom going away? It's that stone cut out without hands that destroys the feet of the statue, ultimately destroying the entirety of the statue. In other words, all of the Gentile kingdoms are now gone, done away with, no more remnants of. It's done. And that stone that was cut out without hands, the one that the builders rejected, Jesus Christ, when he comes the second time, the second coming of Christ. Now, let me make a claim to you guys. From my perspective, are we tracking yet? From my perspective, what I see, what I understand, and what I believe as I read my Bible, I believe confidently and firmly that Jesus will call his church out. We call that the rapture. We say that's going to happen before the tribulation. I believe that. At the end of the tribulation, in that sense, whether you're gone because you raptured or we were wrong, either way, at the end of that time, Jesus comes to rule and reign on the earth. And then what happens? This is where we're talking about. So this kingdom, this 10-part kingdom, if we can't see it now, maybe, or if we are seeing it, we're just not understanding it. Maybe it's the tinfoil hat brigade's got this thing right. There's so many ideas what it might be. But when we see it kind of come down and come crashing down, then we know it's because Jesus came. So when we see this 10-part kingdom, if we can recognize it and see it, we are beginning now to understand Jesus' return is imminent. I don't know when he returns. He didn't send me a calendar, invite or none of that stuff. So I don't know when that's going to happen. But what I do know is when that happens, this is what we'll see. It's made evident in Luke chapter 21, verse 24. Listen to this. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive among all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by Gentiles until what? The times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. There's coming a time, and we don't know how far off. Some of us old people, here's what's really cool. You're going to love this part. The old people think it's like tomorrow. And the young people are like, I don't think it's going to happen yet. And who's right? Yeah, why not? We don't know. We have no idea. That's the part, one of the parts that pains me, I would suppose, is you and I, we just don't know. How easy would it be to set our timelines? Oh, I figured this out now. Let's go, charge up the credit cards. Let's have some fun, whatever. We just don't know. We have no idea. When it happens, we'll be like, that was so obvious. But until then, we're still in the time of the Gentiles. You'll notice as you go around, Israel doesn't really have a foothold. I mean, they got their little teeny tiny country. Oh, that's cute. But they're not the big powerhouse. They're not running the show. I mean, obviously Jesus will run the show, but they would be, in that factor. But the time of the Gentiles have not yet been fulfilled. If you go to the Temple Mount right now, guess what you find up there? Huh? You don't find the temple. You find something else. What is it? I know some of you know this information. It's called a mosque. The Temple Mount stands currently Gentiles. Until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And so let's understand a little bit more about this kingdom. Look with me at verse 41. It says, and as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom, but some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And so this is a very important thing to hold on to. Have you ever tried to glue two things together and one of them is covered with dirt? It's like they're not going to stick because the glue just sticks to the dirt and the dirt insulates and it's all like that. So if you can think of that or imagine that or picture that, that's what we're seeing. Let's just say we find the best welder we know. I know some pretty good welders. I mean, these guys, I would say, man, they do some amazing work. I know that Kenny never watches, so I'll name him out. He's a really good welder, right? If I gave Kenny clay and steel and said, could you put these together? Can you weld this stuff together? What would he tell me? No. Why would he say, you know, I say, like, maybe you don't know. I don't know exactly how he'd phrase it, but that's, he's going to say something along those lines. But why can't he do it? Because they're two very separate, very different types of material. The base portion of it, like the molecules that make it up, are very different. Iron is not clay. They're two very different things, and they don't stick together. They don't function and hold together. And we see kind of a fractured mindset in the world today. It's like, well, we have just to give the example from our politics, we have the left. I'm sorry, you guys can get on this side. The left and the right, right? And they're like iron and clay, man. They just don't mix. They don't function together because everybody's so about themselves. Or, you know, this is narcissistic society. It's just like amazing to look and see around and, wow, man, we've really lost our way. But as you look, there's a division that goes on. We're coming up to the election. Let's be political for just a second. You have Trump and the people who support Trump. And I'm telling you right now, the people who support Trump, like, what was it that he said? He could go out and shoot somebody and everybody still support him, right? He has absolute support from a certain level of people. And guess what they don't like? The other people. And then you got those other people. Who knows who they're going to get to vote for at this point? We don't know yet. We would think Biden or somebody said Michelle Obama. I'm like, oh, please. You know, whatever. I don't know. This is the world gets crazy, right? But it's like, who do they vote for? They don't care so long as it ain't Mr. Orange. And you think about the arguments between this, and the reality is there's no real thinking behind it. I mean, let's be perfectly honest. And I studied this in today, and I was like, man, this is actually makes everything make more sense. When President Trump makes a statement and people go, man, that's exactly right. And that, why I resonate with that mindset, that idea, they become in his camp. And he says a lot of things that resonate with a lot of people. And then when the other guy says stuff, it's like, we're not sure homeboy's awake, right? And so you see this kind of weird setup. And because of that, there's those people say, but we are this way politically, we don't care how inept this guy is. Or we're this way politically because, man, that dude said what I wanted to say. And the more outrageous things he says, it's like, man, this is resonating with more and more people. And so what you're beginning to find is this divided country that cannot unify. Today, we can't unify. Because they'll say, well, that was a Democrat move. Well, then the Republicans don't like it. Well, the Republican move. Well, the Democrats don't like it. And idiots like me who say, you know what? These two parties are stupid. That's me, in case you ever wondered. It's like, well, who's telling the truth? But that's so far from everything today. When I look at the kingdom being partly clay, partly iron, not working together, not functional, having some strength but being brittle, when I see that, I look at the politics today and say, that makes sense. Okay? That just absolutely makes sense. Are the 10 parts one thing or the other? I don't know. I don't know who they are. But what we do know is people have become so opinionated, and I would like to blame the internet because we can blame everything except ourselves, right? But what's caused this? What's caused this kind of a mindset or shift? It's like, I don't know. But we see that it kind of like adds up to what we see here. There's no strength in government today because it's the people trying to manipulate everybody versus the people who are trying to make everything like it was back years ago. And the two factions are fighting. I think when I look at that, though, it just, maybe I'm seeing this wrong. If you guys see it differently, you know, we'll hear it. But if we're unified and we stand together, we can do anything. I say that as a church, as Christians, as believers. I say that as people in this country. If the United States was all on one side and said, yeah, this is our common goal, what we're going to do. But it's like wild as we look out now because what was used to always be the common goals, you know, freedom of speech, right to bear arms, and all the things that people really hold dear to. It's like, well, we like that because it gives everybody an equal opportunity to strive and thrive. That's not an equal outcome, it's an equal opportunity to do things. It's like because of that freedom, because of those things, we can do that. And you don't find that today. It's just not there. I don't know which country or countries or what kingdom or kingdoms that the 10-part kingdom, partly clay, partly in iron, are. But I can tell you, politically speaking, we're at the right time in history for that. I mean, you think about years ago, the political parties were divided. They've always been. There was some different thinking, but you could get behind one of the other guys if they really had their act together. As I was looking at the people running for president now, it's like there's a Democrat that I would totally vote for. But he's not going to be on the, you know what I'm saying? He wouldn't do that. There's a Republican I'd vote for, you know? It's like, but, you know, it's like, who knows what's going to happen? But most people are so divided. What brought this to my understanding was years ago, I saw this political bumper sticker on somebody's car. I was like, man, what are they thinking? It's like, you know, and here's all the poison coming out of my mouth about that person and their opinion and their stupid sticker. And as my good buddy Jay said, he goes, that's why my sticker's on his car. This person could be the best person for whatever political office, but it's going to cause division to say, I'm a this guy person, you know, or that gal, or whatever it is. Because we become divided. Structurally, interpersonally, we become so divided that it's that exactly. But the statue now, we have, I think, maybe a better idea. So what about the end of the statue? 2 verses. That's verses 44 and 45. Very big verses, though. Let's listen to this. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and it broke into pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, a great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain and the interpretation sure. The boldness of Daniel to say, this is what it is. And I think probably the most important thing to see is, like, as you put all these pieces together, the one unifying thing that makes everything work is Jesus, that stone cut out without hands. And you see that all the Gentile kingdoms are gone away with when Jesus returns. What we see there is a promise of our coming King. I have talked to many people with their many attitudes and many mindsets about what needs to happen. We need this kind of government. We're a representative republic. We're a democracy. We're a socialist group. We're a communist, whoever we figure out and pick out. I made somebody upset one day when I said, I am waiting for the theocracy. Oh, well, if you want that, you can go to Muslim country. No. The theocracy I'm waiting for. Theo being God, yeah? I'm waiting for Jesus to rule and reign. And when that day comes, when that happens, all the stuff that we've been fighting with, arguing over, it's gone. I've had to learn some very valuable lessons in my life in the last years of time and so on like that. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned was we're to love other people regardless of how big an idiot they are. That's tough to do. It doesn't feel natural, doesn't feel normal, doesn't feel right. But when Jesus comes back and he crushes those Gentile kingdoms and all that stuff is gone, then we'll be back on God's plan. We'll be doing it God's way. And it won't be any problem to love because we're going to do this thing God's way. Because as much as we don't want to admit it, the government has influence over the people. It just does. I don't know if I've made this statue any more clear for you guys, but there's things to consider inside of the statue. One thing is we don't know exactly who that 10-part kingdom is. We actually probably have seen it already, and some of us may have guessed it right already, but we just simply don't know yet. We just don't know. Another thing I want us to remember is as we get further along, the value or the perceived value of that kingdom becomes less and less, but the strength becomes stronger until, we just lost our strength out of this last one. If you look around the world today, like, well, that makes sense. The armies are weaker than they once were. So maybe that makes sense right there. But we don't know who the kingdom is to come, but we know that so far it's been perfectly accurate, which, here's the last big thing we need to understand. If it's been accurate up to this point and God's in control and God's done it all, will it continue to be accurate? Yeah. And not only will it continue to be accurate, but it's going to continue to glorify God in the very way that it functions. So let's be careful. Let's embrace that. Let's see what God will do in the kingdoms to come. And know this, the Gentile kingdoms that are there, the ones that we're fighting with, arguing with, and saying, well, I don't know what we should do. God already does. He's got it taken care of. We should continue to pray, to love each other, and we need to continue to, serve God in whichever capacity God has us to serve him. And when we do,